councillors and necessary administrative staff and some guests. So welcome all, and welcome to all those other guests who are joining us on our Zoom platform. I will call this regular meeting of Council of the Municipality of Jasper to order for September 3rd, 2024. It's 9:30 a.m. I will begin by thanking Councillor Keller-Harempy for her duties as Deputy Mayor over the past 2 months. Surely the most intensive 5 or 6 weeks anyone has ever spent as Deputy Mayor in our municipality. So thank you for that, Councillor Keller-Harempy, and welcome to Councillor Demota, who began his 2-month stint as Deputy Mayor, I think on Sunday, it must have been September the 1st. So welcome, Councillor Demota, and I think there might be some challenges that persist for you to deal with. Councillors, you have today's proposed agenda. Are there any additions, deletions, or other changes to be made to the agenda? Councillor Melnick?
Thank you, Your Worship. I wonder if I might add to the agenda a review of the temporary parking relaxation for RVs in the community. And also a second item, just to give administration a heads up to see if we can get an update on the Jasper Municipal Housing Corporation and the status of the current housing project, which I don't expect for this meeting, but to potentially be for the next meeting.
Thank you for that. Councillor Melnick, if approved, those would be, I think, agenda items 5.3 and 5.4 in that order. Councillor Demota?
Thank you. I know that's not my dog right now, or Ralph's, so there's only one other open mic, just to tease. I would like to add to start, I have two actually, but I'll start with an easier one for me. I'd like to add 9.2 under in camera. It's just in regards to council HR matter.
Thank you for that.
And then just, I think through you, Your Worship, just to administration, I think in the last meeting we had discussed having a regular update on the JRCC, and I believe we do have the objectives table attached. I don't know if that was the intention of reviewing that after our discussion on the proposed positions today, but if not, you know, I'm requesting to have that as 5.3 under the agenda items of new business.
Well, I think it would fit in any event, as you indicated, that objectives are there, so you could raise your question. But if you want it formally on the agenda, I think Councillor Melnick has claimed 5.3 and 5.4 already.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. 5.5. I had it written down, but he jumped the gun on me. Because you know, I did want to thank you for acknowledging Councillor Keller-Harempy, and I look forward to the road ahead of us and some hills to climb. Thanks.
All right, thank you for that. And yes, I apologize for a barking dog responding to unusual voices. So we have a 5.3, a 5.4, a 9.2, and if I might prevail upon a councillor, I too would like to add an in-camera item which could become 9.3. It falls under the category of strategic priorities and the relevant section of the fourth legislation. And additionally, although it doesn't need an amendment, I will raise a matter under notices of motion, which is agenda item 6, about an upcoming matter that I just want to reference for today for a further discussion. So that leaves us with potentially a motion to amend today's agenda to add items 5.3 and 5.4 as indicated by Councillor Melnick. 5.5 is indicated by Councillor Demota. 9.2 is indicated by Councillor Demota, and 9.3 as Councillor Demota perhaps will make on my behalf. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor Demota.
That's fine. I saw that CAO Given had his hand raised there, and maybe that was to try to answer the question I was leading with there when it came to regards to the JRCC objectives, and I just wanted to make sure that he was acknowledged, if that's okay.
Yes.
Your Worship, I was just going to flag that administration had one late arriving piece of correspondence that was related to an agenda item today. And so we would just want to flag that. It isn't a part of the printed agenda, but we did have that additional item that was sent to all members of council. And so I just want to make sure that we didn't miss that when we got to the correspondence section.
Thank you for that, Mr. Given. That is a letter that relates to agenda item 5.2, the recovery effort positions. And that letter will be made part of the minutes, I think, for review next week. So it will make the public agenda, although it didn't make it in time for printing for today. All right, if it is understood, all the changes that we're looking at, 5.3, 5.4, 5.5, 9.2, and 9.3, is there a councillor prepared to make a motion that we amend the agenda in those particulars? Councillor Waxer, thank you for that. All those in favor? There are none opposed. And might I then have a motion to approve the agenda for today's meeting as amended and incorporating, because I forgot to mention it, the recent letter as referenced by CAO Given. Councillor Keller-Harempy, thank you for that motion. All those in favor? Thank you all. There are none opposed. We have our agenda for today's meeting. We have before us for approval the minutes of the regular meeting of August 27th, 2024. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections required to be made to those minutes? Seeing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve those minutes as presented? Councillor Beldick, thank you. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. For new business, we have agenda item 5.1, an air quality presentation report by Alberta Health Services, a verbal report, although there might be some screen sharing, and I think we can welcome Kristen Pon and Shane Hussey, perhaps. And I'm sorry, before I get to that, Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Your Worship. I see we went right from the approval of the minutes to new business and we missed correspondence.
You are correct. My apologies for that, and I apologize to our guests. We will be right back. Correspondence, we have 3 letters of correspondence. One from New Zealand, which gave us the Maori expression, which I was able to share with residents in one of my messages to residents. I won't try again the Maori pronunciation, but be strong, be steadfast, be willing, and certainly our residents have been all of that, and now particularly showing their willingness to rebuild our community. We have a letter from the mayor of Bow Island, a community in southern Alberta, and a letter from a professor in Mount Ellison University, which has been coming here repeatedly over a great number of years, I think 15 years, and has a long association with our community, all of them sending our support or their support to us. If there are any other comments concerning those pieces of correspondence? I would welcome those. Deputy Mayor Demota.
Yes, thank you. And just acknowledging that we did have a letter come in from Gabrielle Investments, and Shelley Coble had written to council and wanted to get the discussion on small business support on the agenda. It did come in a little late, but I think that in our discussion with the new positions added, just to have a brief discussion or a broader discussion on economic recovery representation with the new positions. I think that would be an appropriate spot to go over that.
Great, thank you. I took Mr. Gibbons' comments to be a reference to that letter that was circulated to all of council. With respect to those items of correspondence, then might I have a motion that council receive the correspondence for information? Councillor Hall, thank you for that. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. And I will now attempt again to return to agenda item 5.1 under new business, the air quality presentation report from Alberta Health Services. Our guests are available. Mr. Gibbon, did you intend to make any sort of an introduction? If so, go ahead.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just very briefly, Dr. Kirsten Pon is the Medical Officer of Health for Alberta Health Services North Zone, and Shane Hussey is the Director of Environmental Public Health. So they're here to present today on a council requested item related to air quality. I'll hand it over to Dr. Pon to make her presentation.
Wonderful, thank you. And just quickly share my screen here. Okay, so I think folks can see my presentation now. Sorry, and I'll just start my presentation. There we go, perfect. So thank you for the introduction. So this request came to us sometime last week to just share some information about air quality and health in the context of wildfire recovery for you folks in Jasper. So I just wanted to start off by just stating my sincere respect and gratitude for having us today. And just to tell you that my heart goes out to all of you folks and everyone who's been impacted by the wildfire and everyone who's been working tirelessly on recovery and re-entry to make sure it's happening safely and quickly. And so I understand we're clearly not operating under routine circumstances right now. And so I just wanted to start with that offer of support for all of you, which leads into my goal for today. Which is to hopefully provide you all with some helpful information on air quality and health, including some of the impacts on air quality and some of the ways that air quality is currently measured, specifically outdoor air quality, to support your role in supporting the recovery and re-entry for the Jasper town site. So today's presentation will encompass 3 parts. Starting off with the impact of air quality on health, then leading into some of the methods for air quality monitoring and interpretation, and ending with some individual actions that folks can take to protect themselves against potential indoor and outdoor air quality threats. And I have several slides with resources at the end as well, some of which you might already be familiar with. So to start off, we know that air quality impacts health, both in the short term and for the long term. For short-term exposure to high levels of pollution, some of the health impacts that can be felt include irritation of the lungs and airways, such as a sore throat or a cough, feeling short of breath, and worsening of chronic diseases such as heart disease and lung disease. Over time, with prolonged exposure to high levels of pollution, there can be longer-term impacts on heart health, lung health, and possible effects on other body systems as well, such as the nervous system. The groups of people most at risk of short-term health impacts of poor air quality include older adults, young children, pregnant individuals, people with chronic heart and lung conditions, and people who are active outdoors. So you might already be familiar with the Air Quality Health Index, or the AQHI for short. This provides a number on a scale of 1 to 10, indicating the level of relative health risk associated with with the respective air quality. And there are recommendations associated with each AQHI number to help individuals make decisions about their own activities based on their own risk level. So some of the components that go into measuring the AQHI include particulate matter 2.5 and particulate matter 10, which represents the size of the particles, with 2.5 being 2.5 microns, which is about 1/20th the diameter of the size of a human hair, and PM10 representing 10 microns diameter. The other two components include nitrogen dioxide and ground level ozone. Together, all these three components are measured hourly and combined in a formula. The AQHI number that you see reported is a rolling average of 3 hours. I know there's been some questions about particulate matter measured in Jasper and the potential long-term risk to human health. So I just wanted to let you all know that particulate matter 2.5 and 10, but I know 2.5 has been the one of concern from the public, are captured in the AQHI, which is publicly reported by Government of Alberta. There's a lot of words on this slide. I'm not asking you to read all these words. I just want to show this table here that shows the health messages associated with the different AQHI levels, and that there are separate recommendations for the general population and for the at-risk population. Again, with the at-risk population being young children, older adults, pregnant individuals, people who are active outdoors, and people with pre-existing heart and lung conditions. And as you can see, the low-risk category ranges from an AQHI of 1 to 3, then moderate, high, and very high risk, increasing accordingly from there. So this is a screenshot from the real-time map that gets reported online from Government of Alberta from Friday morning, where you can see the AQHI in Jasper at that time was 1, indicating low risk. Over the last 2 weeks, the AQHI has consistently been in the low risk category, ranging from 1 to 3. So you can access this information publicly online in real time and compare Jasper to some of the other places in Alberta that are also monitored. They also have access to historical data as well, if you wanted to look back at the last number of days or weeks as well. So lastly, some individual actions that people can take to protect themselves against outdoor and indoor air pollutants. So if there's concern about outdoor air quality, there will be an alert, a special air quality statement or an air quality advisory, and individuals should follow the guidance associated with that statement that is released. And generally, those recommendations are around reducing physical activity outdoors, reducing exposure to outdoor air, so things like closing windows and doors, and individuals can choose to wear a respirator or mask depending on their personal circumstances. And again, different recommendations are provided for people at risk versus the general population. If there's concern about indoor air quality, individuals should focus on cleaning, improving indoor ventilation or improving airflow, and lastly, filtration. And so cleaning would involve things like wiping down indoor surfaces with a wet cloth. So wet cleaning is generally preferred as to not generate more dust and particles, or vacuuming with a HEPA filter. Improving airflow would include actions such as opening windows and doors if the outdoor air quality is good, as well as using fans. And lastly, filtration can be improved by checking and upgrading furnace filters to the highest efficiency that the system can handle. So looking at the MERV number, and changing air filters often on those furnaces. Individuals can also choose to use air cleaners with HEPA filters per the manufacturer's instructions, ensuring that it's appropriate for the size of the room that their air cleaner is in, and ensuring that they are using air cleaners that do not produce ozone. I would like to highlight that testing indoor air quality is generally not recommended. If individuals choose to test their indoor air, however, the contractor they hire should target testing to their individual specific concern, interpret the results, and make recommendations for them as well. And in general, it's recommended that individuals should take action to dispose items that have smoke damage and clean other items and surfaces, regardless of indoor air testing. And lastly, I'd just like to highlight that it's less common for individuals to experience long-term health impacts due to short-term exposure to air contamination. Generally speaking, long-term health effects are seen usually from chronic exposure to high level of air pollution or contamination. So here are some resources that you might be familiar with. So we have a wealth of resources on our Alberta Health Services website. If you go to ahs.ca/wildfire, the top 2 bullet points here are probably the most relevant, which I think you should all have in your package today. So the reopening buildings, homes, and businesses after a wildfire document, and secondly, the indoor air testing after a wildfire document hopefully will be helpful. Hopefully will be helpful as well. So if you go to our website and scroll down to the Your Home section and the Your Business Community sections, you can find those on our site. And then just some additional resources linked there. And then some other additional resources here for your own information about smoke and health, as well as other potential contaminants like asbestos and hiring contractors, etc. So I'll maybe just leave it there then and save some time for questions.
Thank you very much for that report, Dr. Kwan. Councillors, questions for our experts? I will start with Councillor Waxer and then Councillor Wilson.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the presentation. One concern I'm hearing from residents is around asbestos and blowing out of damaged sites. And I didn't hear you reference asbestos in the things that are tests that are performed. And I wondered if you could speak to that, please.
Sure. So you're correct. Asbestos is not routinely monitored in the outdoor air quality monitoring, the AQHI. And that's because it's not routinely, these are the routine monitoring parameters. And of course, asbestos is not a routine contaminant that's a concern to most Canadians under usual times. And so that's not captured in the AQHI measurement that's reported online. In general, depending on the situation, it would be up to I guess you folks in the municipality or private residents or whoever is managing the restoration, depending what kind of building it is, and the restoration contractor to ensure that proper procedures are being followed to make sure that asbestos or products that could contain asbestos are being disposed of and handled properly.
Thank you for that. Did you have a follow-up, Councillor Waxer? Oh, all right. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, after your presentation, I was comforted by the air quality measurements, but now after your last comment there, I'm actually quite concerned. And I would ask, I guess, the Alberta Health Services, like fairly candidly, because I think it's the question out there in the community, is that do you feel comfortable that the air quality is acceptable for people to be back in the community? And would you feel comfortable having your own family moving back in? Because asbestos is a major deal, right? I would suspect that you probably wouldn't want people exposed to that at a high level, or a level, even a low level, I guess, right?
I think that's a fair question because there's a lot of unknowns, especially in this situation. So AHS is not involved in any of the re-entry decisions. We're here to provide support as it pertains to health and AHS sites. So I'll maybe just start off by saying that. And then as it pertains to the outdoor air quality, I'm reassured that the AQHI is low, as I mentioned earlier. However, as it pertains to asbestos, again, the major risk is exposure to high levels over a long period of time. For example, occupation exposures with things like mining, etc. And the recommendation from our end would be to ensure that, again, proper processes are followed for restoration. Unless there's concern about there being large dust, like clouds of dust that could contain asbestos. In general, we would say that following recommended guidelines and processes for cleanup is what should be done in this type of situation. And I linked one of the documents about home cleanup as it pertains to private residences and potential for asbestos. And it talks a bit about wet cleaning and hosing down building structures that might be contaminated before individuals clean up their own home. It speaks less to things like commercial properties and larger scale buildings because it was intended more for individual level residents. But maybe I'll ask if Shane wants to add anything before we follow up here.
Thanks. And good morning, everyone. I think Dr. Pon has described from an AHS perspective our position well, provided some good resources. Councillor Wilson, to your specific comment, we're just not, as AHS's involvement in this has not been part of the in-depth re-entry planning around risk assessment. It's really difficult for us to answer specific questions like that. Not to say that we couldn't reach out to the government groups involved and see what information may be available about those risk assessments, but not something we have at our fingertips for this morning. Thanks.
If I may, I saw Director of Recovery Michael Fark's hand up earlier. Director Fark, did you wish to augment that answer from Alberta Health Services?
Yeah, if I could just perhaps add some additional reassurance. So we had from AHS, we had the EPA team out during for quite an extensive time on the ground. There's also a waste management plan in place that addresses all of the total loss sites that includes remediation and abatement steps to manage the air quality or the asbestos risks. So that's at sort of at the large site level. For individual homes, if there was damage but not a total loss of the home, where there may have been an individual risk of asbestos within the existing structure, then it's up to the individual homeowner together with their insurance company to actually do testing interior to determine whether or not asbestos was present, and then to hire a qualified contractor to do the asbestos abatement. So that's on an individual house by house in a non-total loss scenario. For the total loss houses, there's the waste management plan, which will also include some air monitoring and all the abatement steps required to ensure safe operating environment.
Thank you for that, Director Fark. I would return first to Councillor Wilson in the event that he might have any follow-up. And then I will go to you, Deputy Mayor DeMora. I see nothing of Councillor Wilson. I will allow him to come back into the conversation, but go ahead, Deputy Mayor DeMora.
Yeah, thank you. I think when Councillor Wilson had led with this and requested, some more information for the public safety knowledge aspect of this, I felt like we might get a little bit more of an in-depth thing on what's going on the ground. And maybe that's just wishful thinking on my part or misunderstanding. However, I would just like to ask whether it is Alberta Health Services or Mr. Fark at the moment. When we first arrived to the community after the evacuation order was changed, there were different monitoring stations, air monitoring stations that I saw in the community, auxiliary ones, as opposed to the one that's regularly here to monitor the overall air quality. There are different areas in town that are affected and essentially not affected. And I'm just wondering if, under the umbrella that we do have an overall positive air quality, that when some of these remediations take place on disturbed properties, that we might see elevated risk. And are those mechanics still there in monitoring those areas?
Thank you for that, Deputy Mayor. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you. Director Fark, go ahead.
So if I can respond, so I will confirm with Ellis Dawn, who is the prime contractor for the residential areas, My understanding is that air monitoring will continue. It is part of the remediation and removal process. And that, like I said, there are a number of steps that are taken during that process, including dust suppression efforts to ensure that we do not actually adversely affect the air quality in the area. But I will confirm that with Ellis Don in terms of the specific air monitoring equipment that may still remain in place, and I will come back to council.
Thank you for that. And I will return now to Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, my apologies. I just had to move my workstation, and I did miss out a little bit on Director Fark's initial response. And although I won't ask him to repeat it, although I think I got the gist of it. I guess my follow-up question would be, yes, during cleanup, there will be monitoring. OH&S will be available. Ellis Don will be operating at a high level of safety. Although until then or during then, is it prudent for the municipality to direct to have air quality stations set up to be testing in particular for hazardous materials such as asbestos and heavy metals in the air? Because the current air quality testing doesn't seem to be testing for the real risk in the community. Like, it sounds great that it's at level 1, but it's not testing for stuff that is actually going to affect us.
So I think it's important to maybe provide some clarification on maybe some information that is out there. So at this moment in time, the asbestos is confined to the total loss sites. The AHS air monitoring is sort of a general indication of the amount of particulate that is in the air, as indicated by Dr. Pon. And so at this point, so the risk is when the asbestos is disturbed, if it is able to then be essentially aerosol or come into the air, which again, there are measures in place to manage that risk. So as long as the asbestos is not disturbed in place, it is not permeating into the general air. So it's during essentially the removal process that the abatement is required. I mean, I would defer maybe to CAO Given, and we can go back and explore whether or not, if council feels that it's particularly important to add some additional air monitoring in place, we can do that. As has already been mentioned, OH&S is on site pretty much every day now. They are going around, they are working directly with the contractors, they are ensuring that all the hazardous material and asbestos substance protocols and procedures are in place and are being correctly followed. So from a general public risk or public health perspective, I don't have a particular concern at this time. However, again, if there's direction from council that you want us to go away and consider additional air monitoring equipment, then we can go away and try to understand what that would entail and then come back with a recommendation.
Thank you for that, Councillor Wilson.
I appreciate that, Director Fark. Particle that could be disturbed through heavy winds and that type of thing, right? Yeah, yes, it's for the most part in basements. I'm not sure if I'm getting through or if I'm stalled. I can't
You are not frozen currently.
hear anybody. Okay, yeah, question was just to follow up on how it's contained, because it can be easily disturbed through not just okay, yeah, question was just to follow up on how it's
Yeah, so I believe I understood your question, Councillor Wilson. So
contained.
I mean, wind can play an effect, but to the extent, so the quantity and state of the debris and is such that the amount that is likely to be raised by wind is minimal. And as Dr. Pon already previously indicated, the risk is high exposure for extended periods of time. So again, our understanding of the risk is that it is quite low. We can go back and investigate further if that is the direction of council. but it would normally be during the removal process where you've got large amounts of material that are being moved and disturbed. That is where the risk would materialize.
Thank you for that. Are there other questions for our guest, Dr. Pond? I had one then, Doctor. There are a number of monitoring stations throughout the town. Is there a publicly available map that would show residents where the air is being tested throughout the community?
As far as I'm aware, the Government of Alberta map that I had screenshotted before just shows the one number, so it doesn't get as granular as block or subsection of the town, unfortunately. And that's the level of information that we would be looking at. So the answer is no, yes, unfortunately.
Thank you for that. Councillor or Deputy Mayor Demota.
I'm glad you asked that question because that was one of my follow-up questions to my initial comments. However, you know, aside from Alberta Health Services, one area that I found helpful that is in real time is that Jasper at the Alpine Seniors Summit has a purple air monitor there that people can log into online. You just have to go to purpleair.com and go to the location. That doesn't give you specific to any area other than that location. And I forget the radius amount, but it's been pretty accurate with the overall Alberta Health Services site as regards to that air quality number. It does have a lot of other little trickle down drop downs that you can go into in those particulate numbers that Dr. Pond was speaking of. So you can, you know, go in there and even check the local temperature, and it's been pretty accurate. So it's been a fun thing that we've had to go and look at, and you know, kind of a distraction. But I found it useful when we do have poor air quality from adjoining forest fires from BC and things like that had affected our community in the past. So I encourage people to go there too. I'm not saying that's you know, the absolute truth of what's happening in the air, but it gives us an idea of the air quality number in regards to the air quality index that again Dr. Pond was referring to earlier.
Thank you for that. Are there any additional questions for Dr. Pond? If not, before I ask for a motion to receive the presentation for information, are there any other motions that councillors would wish to make for direction to administration as an example? I appear to have, or we appear to have lost Councillor Wilson again, so it's not that this cannot come back in any event. But if there's nothing further arising for our guests, I wish to thank them for their attendance. Appreciate your opening comments and your support for our community very much. Thank you for that, and do appreciate the report. And might I have a motion from a councillor to receive the presentation for information? Councillor Waxer, thank you for that. All those in favor? And Councillor Wilson, I see a hand up. I'm not sure whether that's a hand to speak or
No, it was a hand in favor. I'm just going to keep my video off. I kind of missed that whole last section of the meeting there.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Councillor Wilson. And again, then thank you, Dr. Pond and Mr. Hussey. Thank you for your contributions. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
That takes us to agenda item 5.2, recovery effort positions, and I will turn that first to CAO Given if he wishes to introduce it or simply wishes to have Director Fark present that.
Only very briefly, Your Worship, Director Fark is here. This is one of the larger requests we have for positions. This continues to be around DRP, the Disaster Recovery Program funding. Director Fark will introduce the report and be able to speak to the positions.
Thank you, CAO Given. Mayor Ireland, members of council, thank you for your time today. I will just briefly share my screen. If I can remember how to do that. Okay, I believe council is now able to see the screen. Basically, I'm just bringing up the report that was already in the agenda package. So before you today is a request for council to approve 8 additional positions to be staffing the Joint Recovery Coordination Center on behalf of the municipality of Jasper. So as previously discussed, the JRCC is a joint coordination between the MOJ and Parks. Some of this, of course, is supported by the government of Alberta as another important partner. And so as part of that structure, we have a number of ongoing projects and based on the objectives that we shared with council last week, and that is included as an attachment to this report. And so all of those objectives require manpower to actually realize and deliver on them. So the positions that we are requesting, the 8 positions that are listed here, are in addition to the position you have already approved, which is of course my position. So we are looking for a full-time recovery operations project manager, a full-time finance recovery coordinator, a full-time recovery liaison and information coordinator position. That'll be 1 person combined into those 2 roles. A full-time housing and social recovery manager position, a full-time social recovery coordinator position. We need some additional administration support, so that'll be an administrative coordinator position, an IT coordinator position, and an HR coordinator position. So that brings us to quite a substantial sized team to support the recovery. The intent is to do term positions consistent with the term that I have been provided, which is 2 years. And that should see us through the bulk of the early days of the recovery. And then there'll be the opportunity to adjust manpower required at that point. The alternatives, of course, council is always aware that they can alter the decision as they determine is appropriate. So you could do a smaller number of positions. The intent here is to request DRP supported funding for all of these positions. Of course, that still comes with a 10% municipal contribution. So we have to bear that in mind as it does impact the budget. But we have not yet got DRP pre-approval to determine that these would all be eligible expenses. We are trying to engage with DRP to determine that. So council could also defer the decision on approving these positions until such time as we have confirmed DRP eligibility or alternative funding sources. As we have investigated, there are other funding sources that could be available to us. Of course, council is very aware of the events that led to the wildfire and subsequent evacuation and now need for recovery for the community. And then we have just a brief paragraph there describing the DRP program, which is supported by the government of Alberta. Important to note that the government of Alberta then looks up to the federal level through the DFAA to provide some backstop and some support as well. So the GOA is not on the hook for the full cost of the recovery efforts. Important to talk about and outline what we mean when we talk about recovery. So recovery encompasses all of the processes of returning residents to the community, ensuring that there are essential services for them, managing environmental remediation, planning for the reconstruction, building in future resiliency, and promoting social and economic recovery. These are complex and multifaceted issues, and they require a multidisciplinary team in order to be able to action them and to do so in a quick and timely manner. Obviously, the faster that we can get the recovery initiatives moving and return Jasper to what visitors and residents have understood to be the normal state of affairs, the better off it will be for all involved. So we are trying to prioritize timeliness and quick action with these requests, which is why the team size is quite large, especially at the beginning. Like I said, there will be opportunity over time to downsize the team as initiatives are and objectives are met, and the resourcing picture allows. I think it's important to highlight for council the extensive amount of engagement that is going to be required at all levels, with the higher orders of government, with the province and with the federal government, and with our partners at Parks, but then also with council, with the other agencies, boards and commissions, so that's education and health, and with our broader community. There will be extensive engagement work required as we move through this recovery process. There's already been questions raised about supports for small business, for example. Economic recovery is an important component of the work that we have planned, and one of our deliverables, and the support to small businesses falls within that. So there is quite some extensive work that needs to be done. And these positions are what we have determined are what is required to allow us to have sufficient resources to move these things forward. In the event that some of these positions are not DRP eligible, there are some other funding mechanisms that we could look at. There is the Jasper Recovery Task Force, which is a body within the GOA, and they have indicated that there could be some opportunity for us to explore funding options there. Of course, our first stop and first discussion will be with DRP. And we are advising council to approve these positions now rather than waiting for confirmed funding, because it allows us to go and negotiate with the various different funders based on an actual request, and not on a theoretical that still requires some approval. So this allows us to go directly to the levels of government and the funding agencies and say, look, this is what we've determined to be the need. This has been approved by our council, and then explore what the funding mechanisms might be available to us. I won't bore you by reading through the strategic relevance. I believe everybody is aware. Of course, the relevant legislation, the Canada National Parks Act comes into play. The Emergency Management Act, and then the Disaster Recovery Regulation are quite critical. And then, of course, the Municipal Government Act. In terms of the financial implications of this, we have determined that the cost of these 8 positions will run about $900,000 a year, inclusive of such costs as benefits and allowance for office, travel, accommodation, and expenses. At that, I will leave it and stop sharing my screen, and happy to answer any questions from council.
Thank you for that, Director Fark. I will open it to questions from councillors. Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Director Fark. I notice these positions cover a broad range of expertise, and these, I take it, will all report directly to yourself?
That is correct. There are some positions, for example, with the social and housing manager, and then the coordinator. The coordinator would report to the manager. So there will be some hierarchy within the structure, but for the most part, they will be direct reports.
All right, and understanding, thank you. We're trying to set up disaster recovery operations while operating municipality with our regular workforce. How can you explain in higher level terms, how do the finance, for example, position in this recovery effort liaise with finance and IT and housing in the normal operation of the municipality? I just want to understand the relationship of the two groups.
Okay. So there was what we would call a dotted line relationship between the JRCC and then the existing departments within the MOJ. So obviously we will still need to have some involvement and support from the MOJ departments, and particularly, as you said, finance and HR. But the work that is required to enact the recovery is substantial enough that it requires the dedicated resources. So for example, the finance position, there is extensive work. So our initial DRP grant was for 47 million. We expect that that will be revised considerably upwards by the time we move to part 2. The tracking and the work that's involved in making sure that all those costs are correctly tracked, monitored, DRP eligible, reported on, and etc., is quite extensive. So there's a large volume of work there that is specific to the JRCC. It will be supported, and there will be a dotted line to the Director of Finance with the MOJ, because there will be some overlap and some questions that will be relevant for both. So that is an example. Further to that, it's important to note that DRP funds activities specific to the disaster. It will not fund anything that is essentially considered to be ongoing or business as usual municipal operations. And so if you are bringing in capacity, we need to bring in the capacity specifically for the JRCC to be DRP eligible. If we were to just supplement the resource capacity already in place within the MOJ, we would run into difficulty with the DRP program, because they would be asking, well, how much of that work is actually for the recovery, and how much of that is for the existing municipal business? And so a clean separation with a dotted line allows us to manage that relationship.
Thank you for that. Councillor Wilson.
I'm in support of all these positions, although I do want to ask, so the JRCC is a joint recovery coordination center between agreement between Parks and the MOJ. What kind of financial contributions are is Parks Canada available to, committing to the JRCC? Are they able to commit assistance to these positions, and why is it really just landing on the municipality to find the funding for this position? And then I guess my second question was already answered. It was how much are these positions going to cost us? If we can't get them funded, we can't fill them. Is my position, because 900,000 is huge. But it sounds like there's the possibility to get them funded. But can we be looking for funding from Parks Canada side as well?
So the way that the relationship is working between the MOJ and Parks Canada is we are both bringing resources to the table. So these are the positions that the MOJ needs to bring to the table to meet our obligations of the Joint Coordination Center. The Parks Canada team is actually substantially larger than ours. And they are currently, and they have been consistently, contributing far more resources than the MOJ has been bringing, which is normal because they're also, to some extent, our big brother, but they also have more resources and other operations. So essentially what's happening is we have identified common objectives. We've identified the resources that we need in order to meet those common objectives being brought from each team, and each team is required to bring the resources needed in order to fulfill those. In addition to that, there is some work that will be jurisdiction specific. So Parks has, for example, all of the OCAs and all of the broader national park infrastructure that needs to be repaired, replaced, and supported. And so they need to have some capacity to deliver on those programs specifically. So they are bringing on the resources to do that. On the MOJ side, for example, again, we've talked about the small business support that may be required. So that would be a MOJ specific component looking at economic and small business recovery within the municipality, so the businesses within our municipal boundaries. And so there are some specific objectives that each party will work on, but for the large part, the objectives that we shared are the common objectives, and they require resources from both sides to be able to enact them. And so I just want to reassure council that it's not that we need Parks to come and help us fund these positions. These are the positions that we need the municipality to fund in order to come close to matching the resources that Parks is allocating to their part of the work. In response to your other questions, so our intent is to work with DRP to as much as possible determine the pre-eligibility for these positions. As we indicated in the report, we would not fill positions without a confirmed funding source for them. So if we are unable to fill them or unable to find a funding source, then we would come back to council for potentially new direction in terms of how to proceed. We recognize that this ask far exceeds the municipality's capacity to pay, if it was entirely from the standard municipal budget.
Thank you for that, Councillor Waxer.
Thank you. My question is in regard to the social recovery. If you anticipate there'll be more positions coming, that will be boots on the ground, providing supports to residents in distress or concern.
I see CEO Given has his hand up. Maybe I'll let him answer that first, and then I can supplement if required.
Sure, that's great. Thanks, Director Fark. Your Worship, for Councillor Waxer. So in addition to any added resources like the social recovery coordinator position and manager positions that Director Fark is putting forward, we would also imagine that this will change the nature of a lot of the work that we're already doing. The municipality is already very involved in outreach services, and so we're going to continue to deliver our regular outreach services. We're going to continue to engage with the community as we always do. I think the nature of those engagements are going to be, really focused around recovery. So we need to keep in mind that, the municipality has a number of existing resources. We do a lot of work with our community. We, do trauma-informed work regularly. Obviously, this is going to be orders of magnitude different, and there may be need for additional resources, which certainly Councillor Waxer, that we're very good at identifying grants to supplement our services when there's something special required. So we'll continue to do that. So in addition to the items that would be added for the JRCC, we will be refocusing our work with existing municipal resources to really support residents in their sort of emotional and social recovery aspects.
Thank you. I see your hand, Councillor Keller-Harempy. I was just going to wait to see whether Director Fark had anything to add, as he suggested that he might, but perhaps not.
If Councillor Waxer is satisfied with CAO Given's response, then I'm happy to leave it at that.
Thank you for that. Councillor Keller-Harempy.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I'm curious about the full-time human resource coordinator position. Will this be a direct link to our human resources department, or is this totally separate? And what would that position entail?
Director Fark, maybe I'll start with that one if it's okay. As council knows, we've been staffing up in response to the emergency and the disaster in a number of areas. We have a number of additional complexities related to HR, including secondment agreements and other other HR matters. Again, orders of magnitude different than what our typical HR would be. So this would be a very close working relationship. We'll figure out what that dotted line structure looks like exactly. But essentially, the disaster has created the need for significantly more HR capacity because we have significantly more HR complexity. We would expect this to draw down over time, which is why it's proposed to be a term position and why we believe it would be DRP eligible. But again, we would confirm that before we went to do any hiring. But in essence, our very, very small HR department can't handle the demands that are being placed on it now as a result of the staffing up and the ongoing HR matters that arise out of the creation of the JRCC and the response to the wildfire.
If I could just supplement the response from Mayor Given, CAO Given, somewhat. My apologies, Mayor Ireland. So especially in a team this size, and given the complexity and all the different aspects of work that will be ongoing, we are looking for specific profiles because there are specific skill sets that we require, HR, for example. But there will be times when there is the work is going to come in sort of peaks and valleys, and it will be different in different areas. So right now, for example, the focus is very much on housing. So if we had the resources in place, if they were less busy with their area of speciality, they would still have the skill set to be able to support in other areas. And so all the work that needs to be done currently around finding housing for essential workers on a short-term basis, and then figuring out the interim housing position picture, and moving people in and out of housing and managing and administering that, there will be significant peaks and valleys in that as well. So it may be that not all these positions stick solely to their area of speciality. They may be asked to supplement the other areas of work as the work demands require.
Thank you, Director Fark. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland, and thank you for your report, Director Fark. I support these positions. I think it's crucial to prioritize ramping up for recovery and ensuring everything is in place. Couple questions. I know 30% of structures were lost. Do we have a number of how many residents actually lost their homes? I feel like it's more. Every group I'm in, it seems like half. Just curious if that's been looked at. My other question is, has there been any discussion around supporting the residents that have made Hinton their interim home in the form of daily transit or public transit or a shuttle that would keep the residents connected to Jasper, friends who haven't lost homes? It would also allow residents in Jasper to have access to some of the services that we may not have in Jasper right now. I'm just curious if that's been talked about.
So to the first question, my understanding, it was upwards of 800 units of accommodation were lost. That includes some of the accommodation, of course, staff accommodation for the hotels and whatnot, but upwards of 800 units of housing. And the number I had was around 1,800 residents is what that represented. So it's a fairly significant number. Getting real precision on that has been extremely difficult. So that was an estimate based on the types of properties that were damaged and the likely number of occupants that would have been in those properties. So it is not an exact figure by any stretch. In terms of support to people who might choose to reside in Hinton, so the only discussion that I am aware of is around school and busing for schools. So there is an ongoing discussion around what transit options might exist there to be able to get kids back and forth to school if they remain residing in Hinton. There has not been a discussion so far that I'm aware of about general transit options. But if that is a direction from council, we can take that back and include that in the transit discussions that are taking place.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Mr. Given.
Yeah, Your Worship, just on the transit side, so we do have a meeting this week to discuss transit and the resumption of transit services. Council's previous direction was a certain number of hours of service per year, 3,250 hours of service or something like that. So we're currently working to see how we can reallocate those hours. Probably means moving to our winter pattern. We need to be able to confirm that we'll have access to JPL to be able to do the student transportation as well as general transportation. And within that, we're looking to see what we've got left for hours and time. And then we would likely come back to council if there was a need, an identified need to be able to go to Hinton. We're identifying whether there might be a couple different options of how we approach that. We could see that as a sort of a supplementary contract or arrangement that would allow the municipality to have a dedicated service for that, but we're still scoping out what that might look like.
Go ahead, Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much. CAO Given, I wonder if that might fall under the disaster relief program. If residents have, I'm not going to say chosen to make Hinton their home, they're here because they have to be. And if there isn't going to be enough interim housing for the next couple of years, I wonder if that would fall. I wonder if that could fall under that disaster relief program.
Your Worship, for Councillor Hall, that's certainly something that's come to my mind. We have a meeting later this week around the DRP program eligibility. And this is something that I wanted to raise of, sort of enhanced transportation services as a result of lack of housing. I certainly would make a case, I think like you are, that this is something that would make sense for DRP funding. We'll have to test that with the government and see. But certainly we want to be able to support Jasper residents where they've been able to find housing and ensure that they can stay connected to our community. And transit or transportation is going to be a key to that as well.
Go ahead, Councillor Hall.
Thank you. And thank you very much for that, CAO Given. And Director Fark, just so you know, we were able to register our son who's going into grade 11 yesterday for transportation out of Hinton. There'll be a hub somewhere, which will leave at a certain time, just so you know.
Thank you.
Councillor Keller-Harapi.
Has the position for a business liaison been considered? We received the letter from Ms. Coble, and I'm curious, Mr. Fark, like, what are the discussions about how we're going to help our small businesses recover?
So economic recovery has absolutely been included in the resource request, of which we consider support to small business being an important component of that. So that was considered as part of the objectives and the work that needs to be done and the resourcing request. There is also the Canadian Red Cross has a grant program that they expect to have matched by the province and the feds that is also specific grants to small business recovery. So there are some supports that have already been identified that that are in place and that could be brought to bear. So from my perspective, I believe that we have sufficient capacity at this time in order to be able to meet that objective and deliver on the supports to small business as well. I'm also somewhat wary of going to DRP with too big of an ask, and we need to be mindful of the fact that there remains that 10% municipal contribution. However, having said that, if a specific small business resource was a priority of council, of course we would defer to council and we could consider that. There's also a possibility if we are identifying that additional resourcing is needed, we could contract an organization like Community Futures, for example, to provide some interim or some sort of term support. So there are other different ways that we could meet that resource requirement if we're finding we're unable to do so within the proposed structure.
So currently, where do businesses go for help? Like, so if somebody comes to us as councillors and said, who in the town is going to help us? Like, who are we to direct them to?
So you should direct them to the JRCC, and for the interim period, it will be myself until we can get these resources in place. So bear in mind that we are just staffing up, so we haven't started, we haven't been able to deliver all or start the work on all of the objectives just yet. So you can direct them to the JRCC. We are already, and I believe that Director Sanders has already been doing some work, for example, on the housing side, looking at identifying resources that people can access in order to look at, what the rebuild would look like. We are looking at a similar program for small businesses where we would be identifying a number of resources and supports. To be clear, this is different than if the MOJ, specifically the municipal government, elected to create a small business support program. For example, if you wanted to allocate funding for grants or other types of support, right? So at this moment in time, we're just talking about positions that can assist businesses through permitting, licensing, finding additional granting opportunities from external agencies and other sources of support, as opposed to a MOJ specific support to small businesses. And if that was a desired request, then again, we would require council direction to do that. That is not our intention at this time.
Thank you.
Your worship, and sorry, Councillor, I see that you're in the queue, but it is just on this point. I would also encourage residents and businesses to go to the existing resources that are there. Community Futures West Yellowhead is obviously a trusted partner that really knows the Jasper community well. They have already established a wildfire complex recovery program, which they're calling a tailored financial solution designed to support existing businesses in the municipality and in the national park. And so they have a direct loan program that they've already stood up. And as council knows very well, they have a lot of other business supports that are available. They have a dedicated page on their website, which I'd encourage any local business to check out. And they're also undertaking a survey right now to help better understand the needs of local businesses. So in addition to any other resources that council might decide are required, our trusted partners that have already been serving the Jasper community have certainly leapt into action, and Community Futures has dedicated resources towards this. And so we can look to supplement that partnership. We could look to add additional resources, but I think the first step for any business would be to make contact with the people that know Jasper well. And certainly Community Futures West Yellowhead is one of those important partners.
Thank you for that. Councillor Keller-Harapi, any follow-up?
would there be funding through the disaster fund for community futures? You know, they have a small staff, and I'm just thinking of capacity, like if they get, you know, if they have 5 communities within their region, and then Jasper has 30 businesses that need to now go for help. Like, is there any funding out there for them that they may be able to get so that they can support us?
So DRP, I mean, they could potentially apply directly to DRP for a grant. It's unlikely we would be able to fund a program for them through our municipal DRP grant. If we were contracting them to supplement a municipal service or to support the JRCC, then there could be funding available from DRP from the contracted aspects of that work.
Thank you for that.
Councillor Devota.
Hi, thank you very much. Just in regards to the letter that we got from a local business owner, you know, I appreciate the feedback, and you know, Ms. Goebel's always been active in, you know, approaching council, and I appreciate that she lobbies for her fellow business people in the community, the small business owners, particularly on Patricia Street, and I like that advocacy. And you know, and I think in order for us to advocate on behalf of small business, you know, we're doing the best we can with the resources that we have right now, and I appreciate that that Mr. Fark had made reference to, you know, building that into some of the services that we'll be offering. And again, I think with the additions of these new positions, you know, there's going to have a budgetary impact, and I'll get to that, so I'm not too long-winded. But not only do we have access to community futures, which they can probably access funding, and there could be some potential programs that we don't know about, you know, as a community yet, or business owners and operators yet, that could have access to other things. But we do have advocacy and business knowledge on what's happening on the ground through the Chamber and Tourism Jasper. And I think with those agencies, hopefully with these positions that we have, there will be some liaising with all those agencies to help improve, you know, the services and what small business and other businesses at large would have access to through recovery. I think I was just making a point rather than looking for asking any questions at this point. I do have some budgetary comments, but I will wait for other councillors that may have other comments or questions on this topic.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Devota. I will take this opportunity then to continue on this same particular point about small business recovery. I had a general observation leading to the more specific request that we received in the letter from a business person under Gabrielle Investments. So, and I appreciate Director Fark that the recommendation is to support social, economic, and housing recovery efforts. So you recognized the economic necessity and the imperative to bring the economy back. I would have perhaps thought there might be some comfort in including under strategic relevance a recognition of Council's confirmed strategic priority of recognizing the fundamental importance of our tourism economy. A simple statement to that effect in a request for decision, I think, brings a degree of comfort to those who are particularly concerned about small business recovery. Following Deputy Mayor Demota's comments, is it fair to interpret the 8 positions that are proposed as covering, particularly with respect to this small business recovery specialist link that has been requested? Would that fall primarily under the recovery liaison and information coordination position? Would you think is that the one person within the JRCC where small business might make their approach to JRCC generally to advance what they see as the small business needs directly related to recovery?
So the liaison position would certainly be the point of entry. and where the businesses would go to first approach, and where the initial conversations, and to one of the previous comments, also making sure that we are connecting with all of the other agencies that are doing work in this area, because it's not realistic to think that the MOJ or the JRCC is going to be able to do all of this work on our own. We're going to need partners to do so. So that liaison would be the first point of contact. And then, depending on the nature of the request and the work that is done, it would then be delegated within other members of the team, and other expertise that could be brought forward. During my time in Canmore, I did significant work with the DMO there, and economic development. So I have some experience in this area as well. And we would expect probably the project managers would have some role as well. So it would be delegated, but the liaison would be the first point of contact.
Thank you for that. And just while I'm speaking, one final question. You've identified all of these as potential term positions. What is the length of term that is contemplated?
So we're considering 2-year terms as a sort of blanket. As we go through the recruitment process and we refine the needs, we may elect for some of the positions to do a slightly shorter term. We could consider a 1-year term. The challenge with that is that you also need the positions to be suitably attractive for people to apply to. And the nature of the term impacts, frankly speaking, the quality of the candidates that you will be able to attract. And so we will be looking at a combination of that to balance getting the best candidates for the role. But as a blanket statement, the intent is to do 2-year terms.
Thank you for that. Councillor Wilson.
Would the possibility be to have these some, or not all, of course, operate remotely, at least for the start, or maybe the full length of term?
So our first preference is to recruit people from Jasper. People who know the community, understand the community, and who may have lost other employment or may just be looking for different opportunities. So the first priority, of course, will be to recruit from the local community. And then, yes, a combination of in-person and remote will be required. Again, given the housing constraints in the community, it's not the right time to be trying to bring in a bunch of additional people in and then find housing for them. So we'll be looking at a combination of those solutions.
Thank you for that. Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you to all the other councillors who've asked some great questions about these various positions. I just want to return to a comment regarding transportation. Just to clarify in my mind, we're moving forward with planning transportation to a site yet to be disclosed. Am I hearing correctly?
Your Worship, I can speak to that. So the municipality has been engaged with the school boards for the last number of weeks. The school boards are obligated to provide transportation for students. The government has already committed that students living in Hinton can attend school in Jasper. And so that means that the school boards have to figure out how to provide transportation for students from Hinton to Jasper. So the arrangements are really at the direction of the school boards. So we don't tell the school boards how to pick up their students. We are a contractor to them and they tell us what they need. I think that they have settled on, we discussed an approach where we would drive through Hinton, picking up people along the way, or one where there'd be a centralized location. I think the school boards chose the centralized location. The municipality is not directing how that is set up, where it's set up, or any of the arrangements. So just to really be clear about who's doing what, the school boards are in charge of the relationship with parents, students, and have an obligation to provide transportation. And we are their contractor in providing that transportation, and we will do it at their direction. And so we're engaged with them. I don't have at hand, and I'm not certain if it's settled, about what location the school board has identified as a specific centralized pickup spot. But just to be really clear, the municipality isn't making that call anyways.
I'm happy to hear that we're involved and that we're participating, and we're going to have our Jasper students who are in Hinton able to attend school in Jasper. I don't know if that came out quite as clear as what you just articulated, but I think it's important for the community to understand where we're working with Grand Yellowhead. And my second question to that would be, not knowing the students at the JPL, eventually, if they are able to return to accommodation there, there'll be a number of students that we will, of course, be doing that transportation.
Absolutely. That's a core part of the service, and that's been a part of the conversation from the start. So that's a full expectation that the student service will resume, making sure that all students that are living in the local area continue to have transportation to Jasper schools. And sort of with this extension of saying, okay, Jasper students that are living in Hinton will also have transportation to schools in Jasper.
Right. And along that, we will still provide transportation from the two ends of town that we traditionally did for students to the school as they qualified under the current legislation.
That's right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Director Fark? Councillor Demota.
Maybe for Director Fark, but could be to CAO Given as well. I think it's just, I think we need to at least have some communication on our website, you know, what these positions, you know, intend on doing, and just an update, especially for people that can't or, you know, didn't have the ability to watch this or not watching it, and maybe use that as a different resource. I think there's a genuine and justified concern in the community that, you know, with all the properties that we have offline, and, you know, that loss of potential revenue, we understand that there's disaster recovery money out there, but there's going to be 10% of municipal contribution, you know, responsible for that. So when we look at the existing properties online, and you know, the burden that's going to be put on to the budget for, you know, these proposed positions, the ones already approved, and then, you know, for the few that we might see that are still coming up, do we have an idea yet of where that extra 10% will be made up with the properties that are offline? Is some of that DRP going to be covering any of that, or is it going to be on the responsibility of, you know, the current tax base with the undamaged properties? I'm trying to be as clear as possible in that request, because you know, there is a concern in the community, and I'm getting that question asked a lot.
Your worship, maybe I'll handle that question from Councillor Demota. So it's a little bit of both. The municipality is facing two simultaneous challenges: the need for additional expenses related to recovery, directly related to the event. I mean, we have costs that we wouldn't have incurred had the wildfire, the evacuation, the destruction not happened. And that's DRP. And so that's the area that we'd be looking for, you know, these extraordinary uninsurable costs that the municipality is facing. And so we'll work to maximize, you know, the utilization of that program, recognizing that there are some boundaries to it, and we'll have to work with the province through that. At the same time, we're also facing a significant reduction in our own source revenue because of the lost properties. And so I think that this is what you're getting to, Councillor Demota, is that there's a smaller pool of properties that are facing not just our standard level of service and having to bear the burden of that standard level of service. That smaller pool is potentially on the hook for the added 10% from the DRP. Like, I think that that's the nature of the concern that you're raising. I certainly understand that. Administration appreciates it. And we're looking to do two different things to minimize that impact. One, I think we need to have a discussion with governments, meaning both levels of government, about how we stabilize the municipality's core revenue to our pre-event status. We essentially, you know, council saw a report recently. It's about a $2.2 million drop in revenue at current tax rates. And so that's that reduction from our pre-existing revenue levels. We need to have a discussion with governments about how we can fill that gap so that we can ensure that whole burden isn't placed on the remaining properties. And then we need to have an additional discussion with governments about how we cover the 10% of the municipality's contribution towards DRP funding. because I think that there are examples from other municipalities where there were other funding sources that were utilized to help support the municipality covering that 10%. So I want to assure council that administration isn't under any assumption that the remaining properties will be responsible for either taking up the slack of our pre-existing revenue levels, right? Taking that base tax that we would collect in any normal year and squishing it onto a smaller number of properties, or secondly, having that smaller number of remaining properties picking up the entire 10% municipal contribution under DRP. We're examining avenues to mitigate both concerns, and we expect that we'll have some recommendations for you on advocacy, and I think it will take some advocacy, and I think that advocacy will have to be targeted at both provincial and federal governments to ensure that Jasper is able to be financially viable through this challenging time.
Go ahead, Deputy Mayor DeMona.
Well, I think this is a really good time to lean on the people and the agencies that want to champion us in resort municipality status. And I'm only leaning on that because it's never been more evident than right now when we've been in this position. We've been pushed by the provincial government to really explore all our potential revenue within our community before we go out and ask for these extra tools that, you know, we would get from tourists to help, you know, facilitate services in our community. 1/3 of our provincial budget goes to supporting tourism needs in our community. And I think that, you know, now that we have the exposure and the real need is understood, I think that we have to involve some funding that revolves around tourism on our recovery when it comes to having tools so that we can help facilitate this growth and not put it on the backs of, you know, the community members here specifically for that. So I think if any time that we can really advocate, and if the ministers are considering opening up some of that, some of those policies, maybe we can start talking about those changes simultaneously. We've already been recognized through COVID that we have special needs, and Jasper and Banff was given some recovery money. So if that recognition's already there, I believe that we have a leg to stand on when it comes to, we should have resort municipality status now, and this will help us grow out of this situation that we're in. And I'm sorry I'm not as articulate as I want to be. CEO Given, thank you very much for picking up again on the nuance of what I was intending, because that's exactly where I wanted to go. And the community needs to understand that those conversations and those ideas are being understood. So as long as that's out there and, you know, we're asking the right questions, I'm hopeful that the province is listening, and that you know, we can work with our tourism industry partners in some advocacy at higher levels, so that, you know, we're not doing this alone. Thanks.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor DeMona. Any further questions for Director Fark or CAO Given with respect to agenda item 5.2, the recovery effort recommended positions? I see no hands. Is there a councillor prepared to make a motion? Councillor Waxer?
I make a motion that council approve the establishment of the following positions to support the social, economic, and housing recovery efforts. 1 full-time recovery operations project manager position, 1 full-time finance recovery coordinator position, 1 full-time combined recovery liaison and information coordinator position, 1 full-time housing recovery manager position, 1 full-time social recovery coordinator position, 1 full-time administrative coordinator position, one full-time information technology coordinator position, and one full-time human resource coordinator position.
Thank you for the motion, Councillor Waxer. Deputy Mayor DeBoda.
Yeah, thank you for that. And you know, I did want to say that I'm going to support this. You know, I always appreciate that sign that Councillor Waxer had up on her wall back when she was a director, and it was leap and the net will appear. You know, there is some faith, blind faith, that we have to take on this. I know that we're going to be heavily scrutinized through this whole process, and whether, you know, we do something right, we do something wrong, whether the province does something right or does something wrong, whenever the feds do something right or does something wrong, when things go wrong, it's going to come on us, and, you know, we have to be prepared for that. But at this time, you know, I'm confident that if we can't get the funding for those positions through the DRP process, it's going to come back to council. So, you know, we'll have those discussions if and when they happen, and we need to, you know, take some leadership here and keep the ball rolling while it's rolling, and get things into place as soon as we can. And, you know, if some of these things become superfluous, then we can address them if and when that happens. Thank you.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I too support this motion, and I commend administration for being so fast with this. We're 6 weeks out from evacuation. We're already here. I'm very proud of our administration team.
Councillor Keller-Grimpy.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just wondering if we could include business, because when you talked about the recovery liaison and information coordinator position, that kind of I've heard from Mr. Fark that if somebody came, they would go through that person first. Maybe if we added business to that position, that our business community know who they would be able to go to.
Thank you, Councillor Keller-Grimpy. I take it that's intended as a motion to amend the motion to include in that particular position reference to business. So under the recovery liaison, would that be small business and information coordinator position? Would that satisfy your request?
Yes, I think it would help our business people too, that they know that they're being included, and then that resource person can say, you know, this is where you go or that's where you go, but they have somebody through the town to contact.
I take it that that could be a friendly amendment if that was accepted by Councillor Waxer. Appears that she's amenable to that. All right, I think we could take that as an accepted friendly amendment. So those added words, recovery liaison, small business and information coordinator position.
That'd be great.
Hey, anybody else wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I will, I am in support of the motion. I do have an additional friendly amendment that was not specifically put into the request for decision, but was mentioned in the verbiage, but I think it's important that we capture it. These positions are understood to be 2-year term positions as required. There's nothing in the request that says that they're 2-year or term, and I think we need to be very clear that that's what we're approving here.
I think that is acknowledged, yes, and that could be, the wording could be approved. The establishment of the following 2-year term positions. Again, I see a nod of the head from the mover.
Thank you.
Thank you. I too speak in favor of the motion, although not with blind faith, but with actual faith, that this is a motion to establish the positions. It is not a motion necessarily to fill the positions. And I have faith that the net will be there before anybody leaps, and that net will be an economic relief net. We will know whether there is DRP funding or other funding for these positions before they are filled. So I think that our director and our CAO understand the importance of making sure there is a landing area before they leap, and that shall be so. Does anybody else wish to speak to the motion before I call the question? Councillor Waxer?
Just to clarify that I always interpreted the leaping as one of daring after you've done the work, and know that the context is correct. It isn't reckless leaping, but taking chances and doing the daring thing that's important to do. And I make the motion in the spirit of great hope that we can return to the amazing community we had, and also, yeah, that it was made in the spirit of hope and resilience. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Waxer. I'll call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you, Director Fark. Thank you, CAO Given, for the report and the discussion. That takes us to agenda item 5.3, added at the request of Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Your Worship. The addition of 5.3, the intention of reviewing the temporary relaxation of RV parking regulations. This is a heads up to administration, and I'd like to see if there's been any issues or challenges by having the RVs on properties or on the streets. This has been available to residents for the last 20 days as we've come through recovery and started recovery. And I'm hoping that we can extend this relaxation till approximately, and I'll use the day October 18th. That may not be the day that actually is determined, but it gets us past the long weekend. It does allow people to then store their RVs appropriately. It gives a heads up to administration if we have space in the community in our existing lots to return these RVs. But I think it would help the community to continue to return and to have those resources in the community, as long as it's not inhibiting any of the disaster recovery efforts and cleanup efforts. And the reason I bring this up is I want administration to have the opportunity to come back to council next week for a recommendation to extend the variance on the bylaw or the waiver of the bylaw until that time. I welcome a conversation or discussion on this point, but I do think it's important that the community get an early heads up as to the use of their RVs as we go through the initial stages of recovery.
Thank you. Go ahead, CAO Given.
Your Worship, no, certainly appreciate the spirit that this is raised in from Councillor Melnick. I think an appropriate way to do this may be to add this to next week's agenda. That would allow administration some time to collect whether or not there have been any challenges so far, and come back to council with a recommendation at that time. As long as the council appreciates this may not be a full written report, but certainly this would, gives us notice to be able to collect some information, be able to come back, even if it's in a verbal manner, and provide council some perspective so you can make a decision about whether you wish to provide that sort of extend that variance or that waiver.
Councillor Melnick.
CEO Given articulated the intent very well.
Thank you for that. Then we can move to agenda item 5.4, also added at your request, Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Your Worship. And we have over the past number of months, created the Jasper Municipal Housing Corporation, and they work independent of council, which is the intent of the corporation to be able to move forward with our housing project. I would, again, this is a request for information potentially for next week as to where we are with our current housing project, which has funding, which has a lot. Are we able to move forward? And it does become part of the longer term housing for the community. And I think it's important that we keep our eye on the interim or the immediate, the interim, and also long-term housing that we can provide in the community.
Thank you for that, Councillor Beldick. There's Mr. Given.
Your worship, I was just going to say, similar to the last item, certainly if council wants a bit of an update about current status, what the JMHC is working on, I think that's something we can turn around for next week to be able to provide an update for you. Councillor Wilson may have some updates as chair. I know the board met recently, but I'll let Councillor Wilson, if you want to speak to it, he certainly can. Otherwise, we can bring an administrative update next week.
Thank you for that. Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, I'll maybe hang tight, and we'll have a more comprehensive update next week. But project is moving forward, and we were entering CCDC 14 design build contract with Scott Builders imminently, and we're charging forward on that project as quick as we can. But we'll kind of build a bit more of a update for next week.
Thank you for that. We added agenda item 5.5 at the request of Deputy Mayor Demota. That was the letter that we received on the letterhead of Gabrielle Investments. Is there a need to continue with that, Deputy Mayor Demota, or is that sufficiently covered?
Thank you. No, that wasn't what I had requested, unfortunately, and I apologize if it wasn't clear. We had the addition of the JRCC priorities table that was at the at the bottom of the agenda, and I wasn't sure. I think at the time that if that was the intention to provide council with an update on those items that we have. I believe Councillor Melnick at the last meeting asked if we were going to have that as a stationary item on our agenda, and I thought that was the intent.
Okay, thank you for that, and I misunderstood Deputy Mayor Demota, but thank you for correcting me. CAO Given.
Your worship, on this item, so that was that table was to show the work of the JRCC, to give council a bit of a sense about the breadth of the work that's ongoing and why the positions were needed. I think the discussion about how we provide updates to council on the JRCC is an outstanding item for us. We need to provide a bit more discussion about what ongoing governance looks like over the next 2 years, and how council will be informed of the work of the JRCC and how the community will be involved in the work of the JRCC. And so that's something Director Fark and I have been discussing. Council previously gave a motion to administration to provide a terms of reference for a recovery committee. I think that recovery committee will certainly be a part of how council stays in tune with what's going on at JRCC. And my provisional thought was that you would likely see something that looks a lot like a format that you're familiar with in terms of the director's reports. I wouldn't expect that they would be weekly because if every week we have our directors writing a report for a full update, that ends up being a lot of their time just writing those reports. So I would expect that would be something perhaps on a bi-weekly or maybe monthly basis. Again, we'll have a discussion with Director Fark about that. And then additionally, this idea of having the advisory committee, which would be the more direct link to the JRCC. We need to come back to council with a recommendation on what that looks like. So you can, Director Fark referenced the dotted lines in terms of administration. I think there are also some dotted lines in terms of governance, because council will continue to need to meet on a regular basis to do regular council business. And then there will, be some overlap between the work of the JRCC and council's need to be able to give direction and support that work. And at the same time, we need to ensure that the JRCC is enabled to do rapid decision making in a way that our typical municipal operation kind of isn't, frankly. And so we're working through that, and we want to be able to bring forward to you a recommendation on how you'll be informed and how you'll be involved. We don't have that for you today, but it is still a piece of work that we have on the list to do, because you've actually given us direction to do that some time ago. So if council's comfortable, I think provisionally what I would work with Director Fark on would be that we would do monthly updates using the director's report template that is quite high level, but serves as a basis for updates and stats, as well as focus on sort of major work that had happened in the preceding period. Other directors do this on sort of a quarterly basis. So we recognize that there'd be a need for increased frequency, and certainly moving out of the emergency response phase. The change in status sort of day to day is not quite at the same pace that it was during the wildfire operations state. So we'll work to refine that. We will use that existing director report template to provide report updates to council as an item. I would expect that they would be monthly, and we'll come back to you with what the advisory committee link between council and the JRCC looks like.
Okay, I appreciate that follow-up, and I think just because of the general anxiety in the community, and people wanting to have updates on housing like constantly and regularly, people want to know where we're at, and we're only limited to the information that we have, and once a week what we get to talk about here. And there were some other questions that came around mental health. And we have that as a #1 priority. We didn't really touch into it in depth last week, and I was going to bring that up, within the parameters of our minutes from last week. But I thought because we had this opportunity here, I just wanted to address a couple of those things, and just so also that residents, community members also know that we're keeping those higher objectives as a regular conversation. So I guess the first part, my initial one, because mental health is at the top, what does that mean? What types of services are being available right now, and are there other initiatives that are being sought at the moment?
Go ahead, Director Fark. I see your hand up.
Okay, thank you. So a couple of responses there. The first one being that in addition to bringing information to council, of course, we are constantly updating the information that we communicate to the public. So for example, the concerns around the different housing solutions through our social media channels, through the updates on our website, through discussions with the media and the media availabilities, we are trying to provide as much ongoing information. So the cadence of that information is already much higher than even a weekly report or coming back to council would be. So there are a number of resources to ensure that the community remains well informed, and we are continuing, obviously, with this staffing request to staff those and ensure that we're able to do that in the long term. In regards to the question around mental health, so there are a number of different components to this currently. So we have support from Alberta Health Services. They've been fantastic. They've had teams on the ground. So in addition to their regular mental health and addiction recovery services, they've been doing counseling sessions and had availability at the reception center in Jasper, at the reception centers in Calgary and Edmonton as well. So there's been ongoing support, sort of technical counseling support there provided by AHS. In addition, like a surplus or supplementary to their standard services that they have been providing in the community. In addition, we have our partners from Health Canada who are also present. They're focusing very much on providing mental health supports for essentially our first responders and those who are directly involved in the work of the recovery effort, because there is obviously a very heavy mental health component to that as well. So we want to make sure that that sort of worker cohort is also well covered in addition to the community cohort. And so those are the two services that are in place here in the immediate term. As we look to the longer term, there will be some additional things. So AHS, of course, will continue to support the community with mental health services on an ongoing basis. Your ESS team and the Christopher Reed's department already does significant community outreach and support to vulnerable groups and vulnerable persons. So all of that work will obviously continue as well. And then as part of the social recovery, we will look to incorporate some what we would consider to be, well, exactly that, social recovery events and opportunities that are targeted more at the community level, whether that's making up for the Lost Folk Fest with some additional opportunity to bring together community for celebration or other similar events, potentially some supported peer support groups or counseling. There will be a number of different initiatives that we will explore. For those, we need the positions that we requested earlier to be in place in order to be able to have the resources in order to develop those and build those out. But there are a number of sort of identified priorities there that we can move forward on once we have the resources in place.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor DeVota.
No, I really appreciate that. And that depth of information and quality is really good for us. And I think just hearing that publicly, like, people will understand some of the things that are happening. And again, I have a lot of confidence in the initiatives and things that we're doing to move forward. So thank you very much for that. Regarding housing, the second item there, I've had quite a few people come forward to me and ask me questions about getting carriage housing with garages expedited, whether they had that existing or not, or the opportunity there. Some people said, you know, if they were able to get that done, whether it's before winter or by springtime, that they can have an opportunity to live here closer to their home, watch it get rebuilt, or, you know, be part of that rebuild. And then once they do move in, there's that suite that could be rentable for other people as part of the density infill. And so I just thought I'd bring that forward because I've been hearing it more, and I thought there were some pretty good ideas there. We have discussed all of this in the past with Parks Canada, but you know, I don't know if that was a topic at a higher level that was ever discussed here in public. So I just thought I'd bring that forward.
I will defer answering that question to my colleague, Director Sanders.
Yeah, thank you.
Mayor Ireland, through you to Councillor Demota. Of course, while the re-entry and the recovery work is obvious for residents in Jasper, behind the scenes, my colleagues and I have been working on really thinking through how the rebuild process is going to work. More details are to come, but I wanted to say in the mix, the carriage house thing is for sure a factor that we're considering. Councillor Demota, you mentioned that Parks Canada had done some extensive work on that. So carriage houses are currently permitted in quite a few areas in Jasper. So in a location where property had been significantly damaged, anyone could apply for a permit for a carriage house from Parks Canada right now. And if it's permitted, then they could go ahead and do so. But we are behind the scenes looking at a variety of solutions and strategies to get the permanent housing that up and running. So while Director Fark and the JRCC are looking at temporary accommodation, that really tiny window of time, and then the interim housing that's between temporary and sustained housing, one of the strategies for sustained housing will have to be the carriage house.
Thank you for that, Director Sanders. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, Director Sanders, just to clarify that, to correct you just a little bit, anybody could currently apply for a garage suite, and the garage suite is only above above a garage. You do need those 2 parking stalls or below the garage, and it can't be on the main level of the garage. So carriage home would be a separate building within that yard, not attached to the garage, nor any parking requirements. So a little bit different. There was going to be more work done by Parks Canada, but the capacity at the office did not allow for it just yet. So there is some. Parks Canada could easily supply some clarity to that, division between garage suite and carriage homes. But we were, the municipality was definitely pushing to move forward on the carriage home as well. We just didn't have the control of that before.
Forgive me for the semantics. And you know what? I think when you Google garage suite in general, you're going to get an above garage kind of construction looking thing. With the it's a garage suite in Jasper, but I think in other areas, a carriage suite. I might be wrong, but when I Googled that, that's why I came up with the term. And I was thinking about, because the slabs can be done really quickly for a garage, and if people wanted to add some dwelling units or a unit to their property, and the opportunity was there on top of the ones that are already approved. Slabs are way easier to pour than forming a basement. So that's just kind of why that one was at the surface.
I'll correct you as well, Councillor Demota. You do need a foundation for any type of second level on garage. So it is not as easy as a slab, although it's not a full basement. So.
I will allow first Director Sanders. I think that's probably related to the discourse we've just heard, and then to you, Councillor Hall.
I'll get more specific information from Parks. I appreciate the clarification, Councillor Wilson. The other thing I figure I should mention too is we're in the process of putting together a housing accelerator fund application with the CMHC, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. We'll bring back some information to you at a later date about what that fund is going to help us accommodate. But one of the things is going to be those accessory dwelling units, whether it's above the garage, beside the garage, or a standalone thing. So stay tuned for some updated information on that.
Thank you for that. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I just wanted to go back to comments that Director Fark was making around social recovery events. And I think it would be incredibly important to connect the residents of Jasper who, again, haven't chosen to make Hinton their home, but fortunately Hinton's welcomed us here, and this is our option for right now, connecting us to connecting the residents in Hinton to those events.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Director Fark.
I would just say absolutely, we will make sure that that is included in our planning.
Thank you.
Is there anything else related to this agenda item? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Demota.
Yeah, and it's just regarding to some of the later items and the outlook for recovery. And I think just under the safety aspect of it, again, some of the more evolving conversations in the community are around the responsibility of the dead fuel that's up on the bench and the threat that has to town. Again, we've had a lot of warm weather. We had lightning in the vicinity again yesterday, and this is kind of on alert for people's emotions, because this is kind of how everything started in the first place. So a few weeks ago in some of our initial meetings, I had some questions go out to Parks Canada on while we have crews and equipment in the community, I was made to understand that those are different crews and things that would take care of doing things like cleaning up potential fuel for fire in the forest, as well as expanding our fire break to the community to the north and west sides, considering the bench and the West Valley here and those threats they pose to the community still. I would rather have the conversations earlier than later, and I would like to know in the future, whether it's next week or in a couple of weeks, what are some of the initiatives that are being talked about and that are taking place to further help protect the community from future threats. So I guess that's just a direction to administration through our CAO. You know, there wasn't a direct request last time, and I think that this time we need to have some information, at least that would be transparent from the governing bodies, so that we can have some security that it's not falling on deaf ears, and there's a genuine concern for those threats. Thank you.
CAO Given was there momentarily. I've lost him now. There he is.
I was just acknowledging Councillor Demota's request, so certainly we can follow up to get some more detail from Parks about their ongoing efforts and the status of the west of the municipality. We can put that on a list and ask them to either send across some information or perhaps attend and provide an update.
Thank you for that. Is there anything else arising under this agenda item 5.5, which is a look at the JRCC objectives, which is part of the agenda? I had one question then for Director Fark. Various terminology has been used in the discussion in the last 20 minutes or so, identifying objectives as priorities and by numbering. Are you able to confirm that these various objectives, although there might be some necessity for a bit of logical sequential ordering, that all objectives can also proceed concurrently, and so that the fact that re-entry in a broad sense and recovering the economy is listed as number 8, it doesn't mean that it's not being worked on until everything else is fully satisfied?
I can definitely confirm that that is the case. We are almost doing, we're pursuing none of these sequentially. So while we are working on the short-term or the transitory housing solution, we are already also actioning, taking steps to address the interim housing, for example. So yes, all of these are occurring concurrently as time and resources allow. There is obviously some prioritization amongst them in terms of, higher priority where we would put more manpower for the time being, but we are trying to action them all at the same time. The order is not meant to infer any kind of priority of one over the other.
Thank you for that. I do appreciate that clarity. If there is nothing else, I would like to move on to agenda item 6. Notices of motion, and I indicated early that I just want to give notice that at next week's meeting, I intend to make a motion. It has occurred to me that similar to changes that were made with respect to the traffic safety bylaw to allow trailers to be parked on residential streets for housing accommodation. But by the end of October, we are likely to have snow on the ground. Usually the challenge is whether kids get out on Halloween before there's snow. So that is coming. We want people as they return to the community to get some sense of normalcy, which includes walking downtown, sometimes from the far areas of town past neighborhoods and blocks that have no homes left. And so to require our provisions that require homeowners to shovel walks is going to be a challenge, and yet we want our sidewalks clear. So I am going to propose a motion next week that council direct administration to bring forward recommendations regarding the advisability of amending sections 13.6 and 13.7 and any other related provisions of the traffic safety bylaw number 244, not later than mid-October 2024. So that sometime between now and the time that snow flies, we can take a look at how we might address snow clearing in residential neighborhoods, recognizing that we still want our residents to be able to walk to what we hope by then will be a recovering downtown economic core. So that is just by way of notice of motion for next week. That takes us to agenda item 7, councillor reports. Are there any reports for councillors? Councillor Kelleher-Epke.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. Last Thursday, I attended a site visit to the new Indigenous Lodge at Victor Lake. We're hoping to have it open next year. The lodge, the Indigenous Lodge, is amazing. Our MLA Martin Long was there along with Mr. Darrell Soroka, our MP. And then on Friday, I also had an Evergreen meeting in Hinton. And also after that, I spent some time with our seniors from Pine Grove, and everybody is doing good.
Thank you for that, Councillor Kelleher-Epke. Any other councillor reports? I see no hands. That takes us to agenda item 8, upcoming events. Of course, we have the Alberta Beauties Convention coming up later this month, and I would just remind councillors who are attending that is an opportunity for the advocacy that Deputy Mayor Demota referenced earlier. We will be in a position to have access to various ministers of the provincial government at that time, as well as other colleagues throughout municipalities in Alberta. It's a great opportunity for advocacy. We have next on our agenda in-camera items. I will say for those watching that they may want to, in fact, revisit. My expectation is that when we are in a position to revert to open meeting following in camera, at whatever time of day that is, we will simply recess until 1:30. The public hearing that is scheduled for that time needs to be a part of this regular meeting so that we can make motions arising from the public hearing. So we will not adjourn after, we will resume, but I would anticipate that we will not resume until 1:30. And so I would invite a motion now that we move in camera, that when we come out, we will simply revert to open meeting. We will recess until 1:30, and then others can join us, I think, on this same link at that time for the public hearing, unless, before I call for the question, is there a separate link for 1:30 that I may have omitted?
The link is exactly the same, but this meeting will end, and I will reopen the Zoom link with the same information at 1:30.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And then arrangements will be made. There is, I think, a technical presentation to the in-camera meeting, so those individuals can be assured that we will find a way to get them in. So might I have then please a motion that council move in camera at 11:38 a.m. Thank you, Councillor Hall. All those in favor? There are none opposed. We shall move in camera. I will suggest we take a 5-minute recess right now and then log back on this same link in 5 minutes time. Thank you all.